Welcome to this lecture on the origin of universe, origin of earth, origin of life in the earth, and subsequently the evolution of life in the earth. Now the universe originated around 13.7 billion years ago due to the phenomenon of Big Bang, that is collision of charged particle. And because of this, huge cloud of hydrogen and helium were liberated. And this actually became gradually contracted. And this contraction resulted in gradual rotation of this cloud of hydrogen and helium. And approximately, it was around 4.5 billion years ago that this particular collision resulted in the creation of the present solar system, which included the sun and the different planets and protoplanets. These were liberated and this created our present day solar system, which was around 4.5 billion years ago. That is 1/3 of the origin of the universe. And after it was created, that particular solar system gradually became cooler. So naturally the Earth's surface was also getting cooler and cooler. And as it was getting cooler, it was liberating huge amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. And at that time, this particular water vapor precipitated in the form of rain, and gradually the surface was getting cooled. So this particular phenomenon resulted in the cooling of the Earth's crust. But at the same time, there was no oxygen at that time. Hydrogen was there. Definitely the environment was reducing. And then this particular surface of the earth was in a turmoil. Why? Because the internal temperature was very high. That was around 1600 degrees centigrade. And as a result of which, the upper plates were gradually moving around. So this moving away and coming closer of these upper plates is commonly known as continental drift. And this continental drift, these cycles were termed as Wilson's cycle. And because of this Wilson cycle, actually different continental or supercontinent was created and they got separated. And that included around 2 billion years ago, it was Nuna or Columbia. Then subsequently around 1 billion years ago, it was Rodinia or Pannotia. And finally, it was 0.25 billion years ago where we had the present day Pangaea, which is actually the last supercontinent. And the separation of this continental belt resulted in the present day continental form, that is the Asia, Africa, North and South America and all other continents. The early atmosphere, as you can see, that Earth faced was actually divided into 3 different components. The first atmosphere was the reducing atmosphere when the Earth was gradually getting cooler and cooler, and that nebula contained huge amount of hydrogen and helium. So it is referred to as the original atmosphere of the Earth. Then the second atmosphere came, which is actually the different gases liberated in the atmosphere because of the cooling effect, and this included different hydrides and also oxygen, but not in free state, it was in trapped form. So this continued for several years, and ultimately it was around 2.5 billion years ago that we had this particular oxygenic environment. And in this oxygenic environment, there was the liberation of oxygen. So gradually the environment became oxidizing environment from a reducing type of environment. And from that point of time, when we say that the first life form formed, it was around 3.5 billion years ago. So between 4.5 to 3.5 billion years ago, that was basically the chemical evolution when the earth was gradually getting prepared. And from 3.5 billion years ago till the recent time, it is actually the organic evolution, when the organic molecules, they develop into the present day life forms. And when we study the organic evolution, there are actually 4 major eon or era, which are Proterozoic, Paleozoic, Mesozoic and Cenozoic.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Initially the atmosphere was anoxygenic, but how did the oxygenic atmosphere develop?
Yeah, it is a good question. Actually, you see, initially we had only hydrogen, so there was no oxygen. But I told you oxygen was there but in trapped form. So the first thing that oxygen came was probably from hydrolysis or breaking of water molecule, maybe natural electrolysis process. So this first oxygen came up, and then the organisms gradually got trained to utilize oxygen. And at the same time, there was a set of organisms developed who could photosynthesize. And this photosynthesis, you know, a byproduct is oxygen. So the photosynthetic oxygen which came out, that actually liberated more oxygen, and thereby this particular environment became an oxidizing environment and we have more oxygen in the environment. We have the first major eon, which is the Proterozoic eon, and this Proterozoic eon actually started in between 2.5 billion years to the present day around 0.54 billion years ago. This particular eon had a major happening, and that was a major glaciation, and this glaciation is commonly known as McCann glaciation, which was actually originating in and around Africa and going further south. And this particular glaciation was a unique phenomenon in which the Earth's surface was totally covered with ice. Now, what was the major reason? I did tell you that there were a lot of hydrocarbons. This was there, which included methane. Now, methane as such is a greenhouse gas, so the temperature should have gone up. But actually the temperature went down. Why? Because methane was reacting with oxygen, which was producing carbon dioxide, as a result of which carbon dioxide being a milder form of greenhouse gas, the temperature went down and the Earth's surface was covered in the form of a snow. So this particular condition, at this time there was a life form originating, and this life form initially we record it as LUCA, or last universal common ancestor. So what it was, basically there was a lot of controversy that the first life form originated around 3.5 billion years ago, but the actual recorded form was around 2.5 billion years ago, which we determine as LUCA. And how LUCA looked like? It was a prokaryotic cell. It never had any particular membrane bound organelle, but definitely some protein synthetic organelle in the form of ribosome was there. So it had the liberty to develop itself in the course of organic evolution. And this particular anoxygenic photosynthesis and oxygenic photosynthesis both continued. The first photosynthetic process, as I told you, was anoxygenic in nature. Here, hydrogen sulfide acted as the electron donor. So ultimately, there was sulfur liberated in the process and there was no oxygen. And this was mostly done by different chemosynthetic bacteria. But gradually, there were the oxygenic photosynthetic organisms where water was the electron donor, so there was oxygen liberated. Now this oxygen gradually were utilized by organism, and at the same time they were trapped by the different minerals present in the particular strata of the earth. This included magnesium, this included manganese, this included calcium and iron. And we can see that different layers of red iron formation because of these iron oxides formed due to the trapping of early oxygen liberated. And at the same time, the oxygen which is being liberated is also reacting with the UV ray, because the UV was also coming into the lower atmosphere, as a result of which the oxygen molecule was liberating nascent oxygen. And this nascent oxygen is also reacting with the oxygen, and this liberated a molecule which is ozone. And this ozone was creating a cover in the stratosphere which served two purposes. One was it was acting as a protection against UV radiation, and at the same time it was not allowing the heat to go out. So obviously the earth became a greenhouse which was very much essential for the development of life forms. And when I come to the development of life forms, we could see from 2.5 to around 2 billion years ago, there was another group of organisms which was definitely prokaryote that came up, and it was the Neomora. And it is the Neomora which was developing into two definite lines. One was the line of the prokaryotes, which continued without any particular nuclear membrane, and at the same time there is another particular line which is eukaryote. And this evolution of this eukaryote actually occurred in different steps, and these steps were called the endosymbiosis. And this endosymbiosis is what? The prokaryotic organisms was going inside the eukaryote, and gradually they became organelle. And we have in this way a spirochete, which is a prokaryote, producing the flagella. And as you know, the flagella was helping the organism to move, swim around. There was the photosynthetic bacteria in the form of cyanobacteria, and this cyanobacteria produced the chloroplastid. And at the same time, prior to that, there was a particular oxygenic bacteria which went inside and created the mitochondria. But at the same time, I was telling the earlier photosynthetic organisms were chemosynthetic bacteria, and the later oxygenic forms were the mostly the cyanobacteria. And these cyanobacteria remain as different strata, which is commonly called the stromatolite. So stromatolite represent a definite photosynthetic cyanobacteria in that particular period around 2.5 to 2 billion years ago.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
You said about Pneumora, and both are prokaryotes. Pneumora and Leuca both are prokaryotes. So what are the basic difference between Pneumora and Leuca?
Yeah, you see, Leuca is the origin from where life originated, and this particular Leuca gradually developed into another set of prokaryotes which is commonly called Pneumora. And Pneumora may develop some membrane-bound organelles which was created by the invagination of the membrane, and that was not there in Leuca. So that is the basic difference. Now coming to the evolution, as I was telling, the evolution took place from a group of unicellular organisms. They became multicellular, and these multicellular forms developed into plant line, animal line, fungal line. But in every cases, what we see is a group of totipotent cells giving rise to different tissue, and they also have a unique division of labor. So different physiological functions are being performed by different group of cells. We come to the late Proterozoic period, where we will see there are two definite happening. One is the cryogenian period and other one is the Ediacaran period. In the cryogenian period, what happened was there was again two minor ice ages, and this actually happened between 0.71 to 0.64 billion years ago. What happened was, again the earth was getting covered because of the reduction of the greenhouse gases. And getting covered with what? Getting covered with ice. So this ice age gradually again went away. How it went away? There was the continuous chemical evolution occurring. So this liberated more carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide concentration going up again raised the temperature, and this removed the ice age in the late Proterozoic period. And naturally, whenever the temperature was growing up, the cells had got a nice opportunity to develop, divide, redivide and produce new groups of organisms. And during this period, it is actually called the Ediacaran flora and fauna, where we see that large number of marine animals and plants developed, and mostly they were multicellular in nature. And then we will be starting with the Phanerozoic eon, which is the next major eon, divided into three definite era, that is the Paleozoic, Mesozoic and Cenozoic era. We come to the Paleozoic era. This Paleozoic era is between 0.54 billion to around 0.25 billion years ago. This period actually had the separation of the Pannotia or the Rodinia supercontinent, and it developed the four different continents, which included the Laurentia, the Baltica, the Siberia and the Gondwana. And this period is marked with a definite ice age, which is coinciding with the Ordovician period within this particular Paleozoic eon. And this particular period saw the covering of the entire Gondwana, which is towards the south of the earth, by ice. And this resulted in massive loss of life forms. At the same time, the moment the ice age was gone, there was the development of new life forms. And at this point, there was a major change. That is, two continents, namely the Laurentia and the Baltica, around 0.45 billion years ago, they came close. And what created? They created the Laurasia, which is a bigger continent, which is the mother of present day America and Europe. So this is a major change, and it was followed by massive development of life forms. As because the life which was already in water was getting into land. So naturally in the land they were developing new life forms, and these multicellular life forms not only flourished in the form of plants, that is in the form of bryophytes, pteridophytes and other higher plants, but at the same time the aquatic animals were also developing, and they were also trying to merge out into the land. The Cambrian period is a major era in this particular Paleozoic eon. And what happened was, in the Cambrian period, there was the development of newer life forms, and we call it Cambrian explosion. There was the development of mollusca, echinodermata and also arthropods. But they were all marine animals. And at this point of time, there was the first formed vertebrate in the form of Picaria, which is the earliest ancestor of present day vertebrate. And this Picaria, they were vertebrate, but they didn't have the present day vertebral column. So what did they have? They have a notochord, which is an elastic cord which will develop later on into vertebral column. So the Picaria represents the earliest organism which is the ancestor of present day vertebrates. At this point of time, there were different pockets where life forms were merging and developing and producing new species. So at the same time, the environment kept on changing. So some life forms couldn't really tolerate this change. So there was some mass extinction. And this mass extinction were mostly centered in specific areas of the biomeres. So what happened was, the existing different groups, all of a sudden they became extinct. So that opportunity is taken up by somebody else, and this included the arthropods. And one such arthropod, we get huge amount of fossil of this period, is trilobites.
So I have a question. What are trilobites actually?
You see, I already told you that trilobites belong to a group of animals called arthropods. Arthro meaning jointed, poda meaning legs. So they had the jointed legs. And why they were called the trilobites? Because their body is divided into three lobes. That is the head and the cephalic region, and the thorax, the middle part, and the abdomen. So this natural arthropod which was ruling the earth during this period of Cambrian is representing the earliest ancestor of different arthropods presently present in this world. The most important phenomenon is colonization of plants and animals in the land. As you can see, the colonization of plants started much earlier. It was around 2.6 billion years ago. And it was gradually in the form of colonization of algae and fungi, which was growing close to the shore. So they were growing into the land, and they developed the first group of eukaryotic organism in the land. But in this period, that is after Cambrian explosion, towards the later part of this Mesozoic eon, what happened was, the animals, they gradually were going into the land. And this was the point where from the fishes they developed the tetrapods. And who were those tetrapods? The tetrapods were the first formed land reptiles. And so this land reptiles gradually was in this particular earth surface around 0.38 billion years ago. And these land reptiles gradually developed a new adaptation. And what was that? They started laying eggs. Once the animals started laying eggs, they were in a better position because the embryo were very nicely protected. And it was around 0.31 billion years ago that line of reptiles gradually developed into higher animals. And this evolution were mostly in two lines. One is the evolution of the sauropsids, which included the reptiles and also the birds. And the other one was the land mammals, that is the synapsids. And this continued to develop and take forward into the next era, which is the Mesozoic era. The Mesozoic eon or the Mesozoic era was in between 0.25 to around 0.06 billion years ago. This period had three major eras: the Triassic, Jurassic and the Cretaceous. This particular event of reptiles growing in this earth continued, and as a result of which we had mammoth reptiles or the giant reptiles ruling the earth during this period. And this particular time, there was naturally the mammals were not growing. But because of some mass extinction which was there at the time of the Triassic and much later in the Cretaceous period, maybe some asteroid struck the Earth's surface, as a result of which the giant reptiles died. And this, due to these two levels of mass extinction, the reptiles were wiped out, or the giant reptiles were wiped out, only the small reptiles were there. This was an opportunity. Opportunity for whom? Opportunity for the mammals. The mammals started growing, and as you know, they were the tetrapods which could balance their body very nicely with 4 legs and a long tail. And the first form mammals which evolved from this time was that of the shrew-like animal. And this particular mammal was developing, and it actually developed into higher mammals. At this point of time, we must also understand there was some change in the plant life. Now, during the period of Carboniferous period, that is the early Triassic period, there were the mammoth gymnosperms growing. And these gymnosperms, they had long size, but the supporting tissue was not there. So they gradually paved the way for the angiospermic plant. So it was around 0.16 billion years ago, the angiospermic plant started growing. So we now find that it is the angiosperms which is ruling the earth. So these mammals and this particular angiospermic plant started growing all over the earth, and there was another major asteroid struck which was in the coast of Mexico. You still find that damage in that particular area. That was around 0.06 billion years ago, and the damage was actually by a 10-kilometer asteroid striking that particular Yucatan Peninsula, and this particular Yucatan Peninsula damage indicate that whatever the reptiles which were still there, they were wiped out. So naturally, this even made the mammals grow faster. And thereby, when we enter into the next era, which is the Cenozoic era, which started around 0.06 billion years ago, and it is still continuing, we will have the era of the flowering plants and the land mammals. The Cenozoic period is divided into Paleogene and Neogene period. This period showed the development of mammals. And as the mammals developed, they started developing a niche in which they can survive better because they developed community. So this particular period saw the development of the highest evolved mammal, and that is the human beings. So this human being development was around 0.006 billion years ago. This development is marked by the development of the first man, which is Australopithecus, then Homo habilis, then Homo erectus, and then Homo sapiens. And when we go into Homo sapiens, the Homo genus actually originated around 0.002 billion years ago. And they were gradually developing themselves by developing their vertebral column. So the posture gradually became straight, and we started walking with our 2 legs. And the anterior pair of limbs were gradually getting shorter, and the size of the skull is actually getting bigger because with the increase in the brain size. At the same time, the cheekbones become more flattened. So this particular development is in the line of Homo sapiens, Neanderthalis, and then finally the Homo sapiens sapiens. And as we are the descendants of Homo sapiens sapien. We are ruling the earth right now, but we never know because this process of evolution is still continuing. So in future, the future man will come, and maybe he or she will be little bit different from us. Maybe the size of the brain will grow, and at the same time the limbs will become shorter. So you never know how we will evolve, but we are not going to last for eternal period.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between Neanderthalis and modern man?
As I told you, both are belonging to the genus Homo. But one is the Homo sapiens Neanderthalis. They were having a shorter stature and they were having angled cheekbone. But the modern man, as we are having a longer stature, and at the same time the brain size is bigger. So we are more intelligent, and thereby there is due to some reason the Neanderthal man got extinct. Probably they were restricted to a small area which resulted in their extinction. So what we have learned in this lecture, we have learned the organic evolution of the period of around 3.5 billion years ago, where the last universal common ancestor has developed into modern man.